We all make mistakes, Quirk. I'm just glad you learned from it. Where is Quip, by the way?
I think he went down to the kitchen to make sure all his food was still in there. I'm sure that he got food.
Quirk!
What was that?
I'm not sure. It kind of sounded like a really angry bird.
Quirk!
I don't think that's a bird. I think that's Quip. And I think he's saying your name.
Really? I don't hear it. I'm sticking with the angry bird theory.
Quirk!
I told you.
Has anyone ever told you that you sound like an angry bird when you yell my name?
This is no time for jokes, Quirk. I asked you not to eat that food that I put in the refrigerator yesterday.
I didn't eat your food, Quip.
Oh yeah? Then why is it all gone? The refrigerator is completely empty.
I don't know, but if the refrigerator is completely empty, then we may have a bigger problem.
What's that?
The director man decided to cut out our snack budget.
Quirk, I'm being serious. If you didn't eat my food, then why is there an empty bowl of chocolate pudding right there on your desk? The empty refrigerator, the empty bowl of pudding on your desk, the evidence is undeniable. Just admit it.
Quip, I'm insulted. Do you really think that your chocolate pudding is the only chocolate pudding in the whole world? It was a big tub, but it wasn't that big. I had some left over from what I brought at the store last night, and I finished it today.
Quip, maybe you should believe him. Maybe something else happened to your food, and you just don't know what it is yet. Quirk, maybe a lot of things, but he isn't a liar.
Thanks, Quiver.
You're welcome.
All right, you're right. I'm sorry, Quirk. But if you didn't eat it, who did?
We may have to solve this mystery later. It looks like we have another group of incoming attackers, and this time there are 6 of them.
It looks like this group is different, Quirk. They're not coming from space. They're already on this planet. Do we have basic information on their identities yet?
It's coming through right now. They are known as the Planetary Pirates.
The planetary pirates? Quip, have you ever heard of these guys?
No, I've never heard of them, but they look like big trouble. We'd better call the director and get him in here. Fast.
Sir, we have another incoming group of attackers. They're known as the planetary pirates. No, sir. This group is coming from Earth. Yes, sir. We'll keep a close eye on it. See you soon.
Guys, I don't want to read too much into this, but if these guys are pirates, and pirates steal things, it is possible they might be the culprits behind the mystery of the refrigerator.
Are you serious?
Yeah, why not?
So let me get this straight. A group called the Planetary Pirates is here to attack the foundations of the universe, and their first move is to steal food from our refrigerator?
It's reassuring to hear that in the midst of an incoming attack on the foundations of the universe, you three are once again talking about food.
Sorry, sir. There was some confusion about what happened to all of Quip's food. He put it in the refrigerator downstairs, and now it's just gone. He thought that Quirk may have taken it all, but Quirk says he didn't.
I most certainly did not.
I believe him, sir, but the evidence sure seems convincing.
I see. I believe I can help. First of all, Quip, I can assure you that your food is safe. The refrigerator in the kitchen is being cleaned today, so all of the food was transferred to the basement refrigerator for the time being.
Oh. That makes sense. I'm really sorry, Quirk. I misjudged the evidence, and I misjudged you. I hope you can forgive me.
I think we can work something out. Perhaps this evening over a turkey leg?
Secondly, gentlemen, this situation, as it turns out, is a good opportunity to introduce you to the intentions of the Planetary Pirates. This is a group who claims that the Earth contains evidence that supports the theory of evolution. Much like you, Quip, before I told you that the refrigerator was being cleaned, they seemed quite convinced that this evidence is absolutely convincing and that it is proof that God, the Bible, and creation are not true.
But they're wrong about that, right? Surely there's another explanation for this evidence, just like there was for the refrigerator.
They are wrong, and there is an explanation. But for now, it would be best if we let the students go to their classes so that the teachers can begin teaching them about the nature of evidence, along with the truth about the Earth's evidence and what it really proves. We can continue to monitor the planetary pirates and relay that information to them as we receive it.
Yes, sir. We'll keep an eye on them. Are we going to be more help from other defenders today, sir?
It's quite possible. Some of these issues can become quite technical, and the planetary pirates are incredibly intelligent. So I'll go through the Defenders database again and see who we might need to call in to help us. Kids, are you ready to receive your training in the area of the Earth's evidence so that you can help us defend the foundations of the universe against the planetary pirates? Yeah! Great. Listen closely to your teachers, and we will meet after class to review what we have learned.
All right, so we need our preschool patrol to head to the annex. And the K through 2 group, that is primary protectors. Y'all are going to head to class. And 6 through 12, and adults are heading to class. And we pray. Amen. I'll tell y'all, I cannot name how many times I went door knocking, that you knock someone's door and they say, my grandma took me to VBS there when I was a little boy. So it plants seeds. VBS is good for our own children and planting seeds in our relatives' children and our fans and families' children. Yeah. Okay. Now you can see me with your right eye. Okay. So a major argument used in favor of Darwinian evolution against the biblical creation is the fossil record. And I know when you were growing up, you probably always were seeing those layers. Remember the layers that they always talk about. And so you go down here to Riverview Park, and you walk along the river, and you can see layers in the dirt. And then they'll tell you, okay, this layer is this many million years old, and this layer, and on and on and on they'll go. So the question is, does it support evolutionary theory? And actually, we're going to look at a lot of famous evolutionists who will tell you it doesn't. So we're going to, first of all, answer that. And the second question is, could it prove God in the flood? Not specifically creation necessarily. We're not going back that far. We're going back to the flood. And so those layers help with the flood. And we're going to start off with a video about that. Will you play the video that's called Nuts and Bolts of the Flood? I thought this video was really good.
Genesis 7:11 tells us that when the flood began, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up. The great deep referring to the ocean floor. Earth is so far the only known planet whose surface is broken into tectonic plates. Many creation scientists believe the cracking of that egg happened when the flood began. As the tectonic plates of the earth move around, floating on the mantle, some of the plates move apart, and new material from the mantle comes up to the surface of the earth to fill the gap, called divergence. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, we find divergent zones where the seafloor is broken down the middle and is spreading away from the divergent zone, causing continents to move away from each other and forming underwater mid-ocean ridges. Some plates slide by each other as they move, called transformation, and some will converge, or they smash into each other, forming mountains, or subduct beneath another plate, diving downward into the mantle and forming underwater trenches as they do so, like the Mariana Trench in the western Pacific Ocean, a trench that is so deep that Mount Everest could be put in the trench at its deepest point and still be over a mile under the water. Where ocean tectonic plates bump into continents, there are oftentimes subduction zones where the oceanic plate smashes into a continental plate and then is pushed downward into the mantle, with the sea floor being heated and then recycled into the mantle as it moves downward. Geophysicists and geologists believe that when the flood began, something broke apart the surface of the earth, creating its plates, and when that happened, it caused what is called thermal runaway subduction of the oceanic plates. Basically, the seafloor began moving quickly in a motion like a conveyor belt on the order of meters per second rather than today's rate of centimeters per year. The front end of the conveyor belt smashed into a continent and then dove below it, moving towards the mantle. And at the back end of the conveyor belt, where divergence is happening in the ocean, new material from the mantle surfaced to fill the gaps being made. When that hot mantle material, basically melted rock, hit the water, it would have quickly superheated the ocean water and sent steam jets up into the atmosphere all along the divergent zones of the ocean. That water would then have come down from the atmosphere as rain. The windows of heaven were open, Genesis 7:11. As the sea floor dove into the mantle and new material surfaced, forming new ocean floor, that newer material would have been hot still. Almost everything that gets hot expands, taking up more space. The new ocean floor, therefore, would have been expanded and would have therefore ridden higher in the mantle like a cork. And that means that during the flood, the sea floor would have been much higher than it is now, pushing water onto the continents as well as mud and fish along with it. Once the entire sea floor was completely overturned by this conveyor belt motion, it would have abruptly slowed its movement, causing the water level on the continents to level off. And then as the new sea floor cooled, it would have begun condensing and would have sat lower in the mantle once again, allowing the water over the continents to move back to the ocean where it came from. Well, when catastrophic plate tectonics was originally being developed in the early 1990s, it was predicted that if the ocean floor was diving into the mantle that fast during the flood, there should be enormous piles of colder material, the pre-flood ocean floor, beneath these subduction zones at the base of the mantle that haven't yet had time to melt and then be recycled into the mantle, since this only happened a few thousand years ago. Well, sure enough, once technology progressed to the point that we could study the Earth's mantle density structure, the creationist prediction was verified. Piles of colder material were found in the Earth under these subduction zones at the base of the mantle. Now, while all of that flood activity was going on, many of the Earth's mountains were forming rapidly as the plates were quickly moving, smashing into each other, and the continents themselves were covered with hundreds of feet of added sediment, meaning that the continents after the flood were higher than they would have been before the flood. The result was that the post-flood world was much different from the pre-flood world. The waters of the ocean can no longer get high enough to again cover the earth with a flood like that. Now that helps us to understand Psalm 104, 6 through 9. You covered the earth with the deep, as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke, they fled. At the sound of your thunder, they took to flight. The mountains rose, perhaps as the plates converged. The valleys sank down to the places that you appointed for them, oceanic trenches, perhaps. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. The flood happened, and science supports it. Check out our website at apologeticexpress.org for more information.
We're going to break all of that down throughout the class, but there's a 4-minute version of what our whole class is going to cover. So I know it was fast. Let me break down really quick what I heard him say, and then we'll go through the details of this class. So when our planet is different than any other planet, we have plates that actually move. And so with that, there are several different things that can happen. One is where they come apart and the magma can come up out of the ground, as we think of volcanoes and things like that. One is where they rub together and you get those earthquakes and different methods like that. And another one, and this is the one that he's really discussing with the flood, is where a plate can actually go underneath another plate or a continent. And so with the flood, what creationists believe happened was that the plates went down underneath a continent, and as they do, all of that material is being thrown up. So all the fossils they're not fossils yet, but all those animals that will become fossils that lived at the bottom of the ocean are now going to the top of mountains and places. And then as it's coming around, the other side of it is pushing up material. So as this is going down, the other side is pushing up because it's going to make a circle. And as it's pushing up, the material that is pushing up is very, very hot. And so when that hot material rises to the surface, hot things expand. And so as it expands, the floor of the ocean is rising, and so the water has to go somewhere. So where does it go? All over the earth. Then as it cools, guess what's going to happen? It's going to settle, and all that water from all over the earth is going to go back into the oceans. So this is how, and also, as the heat is coming up, it produces vapors, and as the vapors go into the sky, we also have rain coming down. So we've got the rain coming down, we've got the earth oceans coming up, which forces the water onto the continents. And then as it cools back down, the water will come back to its original place. However, it will never be the same as it was. Those animals that died during it are forced up into high places that they would have never been, those ocean animals. Also, another thing that will be different is it changes the mountains and the canyons. Mountains that didn't exist are now mountains because of all that sediment that was pushed from the bottom of the ocean. And so probably our mountains and our continents actually are taller after the flood, which, do you remember what promise God made man after the flood? What is the rainbow promise? It will never flood again. Well, guess what? The continents are now taller than they were, so that ocean water can never get back up over them again, unless God did a cataclysmic event again like he did, but he's not going to. But naturally, the continents and the mountains are taller than they were, and so the water cannot do that on its own ever again. So that's what is the prediction of creationists of what the flood would have caused. Now the question is, does the fossil record support that? Quick answer, yes. Now, what would evolution say, and does it support that? So that's what we're going to be looking at today, is what would both sides say would happen. So here's what the evolutionists would say would happen. And I'm just going to throw a lot of this up here because we're not going to have time to look at very much of the details. But evolutionists say we start with a single-cell organism. And so if you're going to have layers in the fossil record, what should be the bottom layer? All those single-cell organisms that used to live. Then as you go on, billions of years, the fossils are transitioning. And so you should go from single-cell organisms to a little bit more complex organisms to more complex organisms to more complex organisms. And so each layer should have more and more complex organisms. And then inevitable extinctions as a result of survival of the fittest. So there will be extinctions events, but those extinction events aren't going to happen all in one swipe. Okay, think about this. If stronger and stronger humans, let's go to, this is the most recent microevolution in humans I can think of, the slavery days. Stronger and stronger humans survived, the weaker slaves died. As that happens, though, do you see all the weak people die at the same time? No, that doesn't happen in microevolution. And it also should not happen in macroevolution. In macroevolution, it would be Rosie dies, but Arthur lives. 20 years later, now one of your kids dies, but the other one lives. 20 years later, and it happens slowly over time. So the fossil record should show a slow extinction of certain groups as other groups take over. The creation would show a record of death that all happened at one time, a mass extinction. Few fossils will be below the flood level, but lots and lots of fossils at the flood level because everything died at the same time. And this massive destruction would not be in one location, it would be worldwide. And, okay, the massive destruction would not be half animal, half creatures, it would be fully developed animals found in the mass destruction. And where would you find the fossils? They would all be in the type of rock that's made from water, flooding, pushing on the rock. And simple and complex creatures would be mixed. In other words, if I look at a roly-poly and I say that's a simple creature, and I look at an orangutan and I say that's a complex creature, then if I look at a flood level event that happened throughout the world, it would have both in it, according to creationists. According to evolutionists, the roly-poly is going to live for millions of years, before it grows into the orangutan. So according to creationists, if there was one massive event that took out the whole world called the flood, they would be mixed. However, this is the creation scientists, how they predict it. The larger, faster, smarter creatures might be higher up in that flood. Think about this. I don't know if I'm giving examples I know. I don't know that y'all know these, but in Leedy we had lots of fires, and whenever we'd have a fire, the cattle would all run to the highest location to try to survive as long as they could. And so if the farmer wound up finding his cattle in his 200 acres, they'd all be in half of an acre bunched together in the one highest location trying to get away from that fire. And he might be able to save his cattle. So according to creationists, if there was a worldwide flood, the smartest, largest, strongest, fastest animals would have ran the longest before they got killed. Not that they weren't killed in the same flood, but they would all be located in a higher level because they tried to get away. The smallest, weakest creatures would be lower. And you're going to find these marine creatures. These creatures that used to be at the bottom of the ocean are not going to be at the bottom of the ocean. They're like, puppets time. Not yet, guys, not yet. All right. And these marine fossils will be found throughout all the world, through the whole record. Marine creatures that used to be at the bottom of the ocean now will be worldwide. Post-flood extinctions would often be found in the record. So what he's saying here is evolution is going to have small extinctions. Your child, you lose one because it's not as strong. Your grandchild, lose one because it's not as strong, on and on. That's how evolution works. How the flood worked was it wiped out massive groups of people, but also the post-flood world now has new mountains, taller continents, different water, different heat, and so we're going to have massive extinctions where whole groups of animals don't survive after the flood that would have survived before the flood. Evolution wouldn't have that. It would have a little bit of an animal, a little bit of an animal, a little bit of an animal. And creation will have no half animals. None of these ones you see in the pictures, like that guy behind you that's half penguin, half lobster. You're not going to find any of those in a creationist fossil. And creation says you will see diversifying of creatures after they left the ark. So you will see many different types of creatures in the post-flood time. Why? God brought every creature into the ark. So as they go out, there's going to be every type of creature post-flood. Now, there will be diversifying in that population, and that is what we talked about yesterday that we call microevolution. In other words, there's going to be dogs alive at the same time as chickens in the post-flood. But then there will be dogs that will become chihuahuas, and others that will become Great Danes. Okay. Covered 3 pages. All right. These classes have so much material. All right. 3 characteristics of the fossil record. Here are 3 characteristics evolutionists and creationists will all agree is in the fossil record. Then the question is, which does it point towards? There was an abrupt appearance. In other words, we have 99% of all the time of the world, according to evolutionists, but there's no fossil record. There's no record of that little bitty guy, and then that bigger guy, and then that bigger guy. It's abrupt. All of a sudden, now there's a fossil record. Where was all the rest? We're not there yet. Second is stasis. And third is extinction. This is agreed by both groups. The question is, which does it point towards? So let's start with the first, abrupt appearance. When fossils first appear in the fossil record, they appear fully formed without any evolutionary history. So the first fossils we can find are fully formed. They're not half creatures. This is agreed by everyone. Let's read some quotes from evolutionists. Let me tell you who it is I'm quoting. This is the Research Department of the University of Texas, Austin, UT News. This rapid diversification known as the Cambrian explosion puzzled Charles Darwin and remains one of the biggest questions in animal evolution to this day. So they had to name it. They had to figure, they have to try to always explain things. So they call it the Cambrian explosion. For some reason, there's this explosion of fossils that are all already full-formed animals. And we don't have an answer. The American scientist, as Darwin noted in The Origin of Species, the abrupt emergence of arthropods in the fossil record during the Cambrian presents a problem for evolutionary biology. The American scientist, there are no obvious simpler or intermediate forms either living in the fossil record that shows convincingly how modern arthropods evolved from worm-like ancestors. There's no proof. There's no fossils that are before this time period. They call it the Cambrian explosion or the abrupt appearance. There was this, for some reason, there's just this explosion of fossils that are all full formed. They're not half creatures. Interesting. Let's keep going to some more famous names. Stephen Gould. Stephen Gould was a Harvard evolutionary paleontologist. And he says the Cambrian explosion was the most remarkable and puzzling event in the history of life. Okay, let's keep going. How about Richard Dawkins? Y'all have heard of him, right? Richard Dawkins of Oxford University. He says, it is as though they were just planted there without any evolutionary history. Let's continue on. What about Columbia University paleontologist the American Museum of Natural History, the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard. His name, George Gaylord Simpson. Here's what he said. Suddenly, and they're not led up to by known gradual, completely transitional sequences. So the fossils did not ever have those transitions. It just suddenly appeared, fully formed. We don't understand why. Okay? Well, let's continue. So what do all those guys agree on? All the evolutionists agree that the first fossils are abrupt and complex. There's not half creatures. There's not miniature organisms becoming. Okay, so let's talk about trilobites. I grabbed one of my trilobites this morning. I've always loved fossils, but I don't know why. It seems like I have more trilobites than anything. This little dude has survived, according to them, millions of years, so you touching it shouldn't hurt anything. You can look at him. But, of course, that's not true. But here's some examples of trilobites. I think I've got all three of those examples somewhere at my house. Look at his eyes as you pass him around. And I'm calling him a he. I don't know that he's a he. I haven't checked his reproduction. But look at his eyes. So the fossil record produces no evidence for the evolution of the trilobite, and yet its complexity is stunning. Here's what's so stunning about it. His vision, this creature is equipped with an extremely complex vision system using a aplanatic lens that is more complex than the human eye, which is equipped with a single refractive lens. So our eye only has one single refractive lens. His is more complex. So his eyeballs are more complex than our eyeballs. And that is at the bottom of that record. Yeah, more complex than Arthur's eyes. That's true. He is at the bottom. He's one of those bottom creatures that we believe were pushed up from the bottom of the ocean during the flood. The evolutionists say is the oldest of creatures. If that's true, then why is his eyes better than my eyes? Why didn't my eyes evolve to be better than? See? So, the fossil record supports the creationist contention. Biologists have pinpointed a few dozen distinct phyla. The level of organization used to group organisms based on their basic body plans. What I want you to understand is when we're using evolutionary terminology, it's not going to be the same as what we believe because we believe in kinds. They're going to talk about things like phyla and things like that. In other words, if you've got the same type of body as an orangutan, they're noticing the similarities in body types. Now, here's what's interesting. You ready? They believe there's over 27 different types of phyla. Okay? They say it started like this tree on the left. That it was one creature and it split and split and split and split and split. Here's the problem. Over 20 of those are all in that Cambrian explosion of fossils. So if you've got 27 different types of body parts that are found throughout all animal kind, 20 of those are found in the very oldest fossils. So the biblical is, yes, we're a tree, but we're a tree in an orchard of all different types of trees. And on each tree, yes, there will be branches, but only within your type of trees. There's human branches, there's dog branches, there's cat branches on a cat tree, on a dog tree. Not one tree, but an orchard of different types of trees. I'm racing that clock all day. All right, characteristic number 2. Stasis. After creatures appear in the fossil record, they remain virtually the same throughout the rock layers. All evolutionists agree on this. So once you find the first rock layer of any type of fossil, as you continue to go through the layers, those fossils don't change. A trilobite still looks like a trilobite. A dog still looks like a dog. So let's look at some famous men. Stephen Gould, we mentioned him a minute ago. He says there is no direct evidence of transitions. Smooth transitions means that a chimpanzee grows an extra leg, then it grows a different nose. Smooth transitions. No evidence. All right? Stephen Gould, precious little in the way of intermediate forms. We can't find those links. No evidence of it. Stephen Gould, absence of fossil evidence for intermediary stages. There's no proof of those half stages. Stephen Gould, extremely rarity of transitional forms. Stephen Gould, not the evidence of fossils. This is an evolutionist. Stevens, okay, we're running low on time. Let's keep moving. Take me to point number 3, please. Characteristic number 3. Extinction. Mass extinction such as would suggest a worldwide catastrophe, a phenomenon appear in the fossil record. And they've had to try to figure out excuses for why this would be. And you probably got to see a Disney movie about it when you were younger. Some type of asteroid, some type of this, some type of that. The proof is, in the fossil record, there was a mass extinction events. Not a little bit at a time. So they've created 5 different options of what it is. Here's the problem. The first one they say killed 60%. The second one they say killed 75%. The third one killed 95%. The fourth one killed 80%. The fifth one killed 75%. And if Harley was here, he would tell you the math doesn't add up, does it? Okay. All they know is there was some type of mass extinction event that they can see through the fossil record. And they don't know what it was. Cause? The flood. The flood was the mass extinction event. And instead of, oh, that was my last slide. I am going good. Okay, instead of that mass extinction event being, let me go back to this then since I have time. Instead of that mass extinction event being, these are all the different layers of people dying off, these all happened during one flood. So during one flood, these little dudes and people like them, and I've got almost everyone in that pink picture somewhere in this building I could show you, they were probably all at the bottom of the ocean, and the first thing that happens with the ocean is all this stuff gets forced up. And so we find this everywhere. All the way on the top of Mount Everest, we find these ocean-dwelling creatures. That's the bottom level. Then you go up, and you go up to those animals that were able to run away further, and you go up to those animals that were land-dwelling. Then from the land-dwelling animals, you have the bigger ones that are getting further away. But all of them were wiped out in the same mass extinction event. We call it the flood. So here's the difference in the timeline. Pre-Cambrian is 6,000 to 8,000 years ago. And guess what? The Paleozoic period, the Mesozoic period, and all of that is all in a one-year period. It's called the flood. That's the way to explain this mass extinction events. All right, I'm going to call that my time if you want to call it with me. So here's what I'm going to offer you adults. You have
No, we were ready to leave class. Oh, yeah. Thank you. So we go right from post right to pre, right?
Okay. Where are we at? Right on page 24?
Page 24, post class.
Some of mine aren't highlighted, so I'm like, oh.
Oh, I know. I come across a few of mine too.
Did they get all yours?
I've only had one so far.
I've had like 3.
So yeah, we'll go directly into that next.
Post into pre.
Yeah.
So are you even gonna? Oh, so you
I've got it
deleted
modified
Okay.
to kind of go into the next thing. Yeah.
How about the dog?
No. The dog thing, we'll still let that, we're not going to do
Right,
that.
yeah, but what are you modifying here?
But whenever I talk, like at the end, this is set up where it's like night by night and see you tomorrow. I've taken all
Okay,
those
yeah.
out and modified it. So whenever you guys are ready, I'll kind of quiet them down and you guys can start.
Okay.
So whenever we go to pre, it's just you two. And then I come in later.
It is?
You guys do
We're on
start
page
first,
24,
Yeah,
27.
we're starting with post.
We're on 24?
Yeah, post.
Okay. So I'll kind of quiet them down and you guys can start.
No, you're on here too. Okay.
Yeah. I was talking about the pre one, the next one. That
Oh, okay, so you're going to be gone.
So we're all graduation. Okay, we ready?
My mic's not on.
Well,
Oh,
we start out.
sorry.
Ready?
I don't know about you two, but I sure learned an awful lot about the Earth's evidence today. I guess I never realized that true science is always going to agree with God and the Bible.
You're right, Quirk. And the planetary pirates are just some of the people in the world who will try to twist, manipulate, and lie about the true evidence of the Earth, and that is what proves.
But I think it's really cool that there are lots of defenders who know just as much about science as the planetary pirates do. And they believe in God, the Bible, and creation. I guess I never realized it until today. It's good to know they are on our side.
I want to thank you all for your good work. Today, as we defended the foundations of the universe against the very tricky group of attackers, the planetary pirates were a formidable adversary, weren't they?
Yes, sir, they were. They were just talking about it before you came in. We all agreed that we've learned a lot today.
You're right, Quiver, we have. One of the things that I hope you'll learn from this is that even when a person sounds very intelligent, like Captain Claptrap or Dr. Bones Botcher, and seems to have evidence to support his beliefs, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are always right.
Just like me and the empty refrigerator, right?
Exactly, Quip. If you can try to remember the example of the empty refrigerator, you'll always remember that evidence isn't always what it seems. It can be misunderstood, misinterpreted, and perhaps even misleading. We don't need to jump to conclusions or come to a situation with too many assumptions, or we will always be wrong. The truth, as we have seen again, will always rise to the surface no matter what.
It was also interesting to see that some of the planetary pirates weren't really bad. They were just on the wrong side, like the Flipper sisters, Panga and Ro. The evidence that they represented isn't wrong. It's just been used in the wrong way.
That's very true, Quirk, and very important. We have to be careful not to dismiss evidence just because it is being misunderstood. There's almost always some truth involved, even when it is being misunderstood. And there's no reason that people like Panga and Ro couldn't go from being attackers to becoming defenders if they decide to accept and teach the truth.
I'm starting to feel a lot less afraid and a lot more confident about defending the foundations of the universe, sir. Thank you for helping us see that we have nothing to fear as we face these attacks.
You're welcome, Quiver. but we are all in this together. We need the Bible, of course, but we also need the knowledge and expertise of many different defenders in order to answer some of the attacks of people like the planetary pirates. If we trust in God and His Word, work together, and keep learning, we can face anything.
Anything that is except an empty refrigerator. That's terrifying.
Fair enough, Quip. I have a feeling that there are more attacks on the foundations of the universe yet to come. In fact, if my suspicions are confirmed, the next attack might prove to be the strongest one yet.
I really enjoyed that fellowship meal at your house last night, Quip. Thanks again for inviting me.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, wasn't it? I think everyone who came had a good time.
I did notice that Quiver and his family weren't there last night, and he still hasn't come into today. Do you think everything is okay?
You're right. Maybe I should call and check on him. You keep your eye on the gap radar in case anything shows up, and I'll give Quiver a call.
Good idea.
Well, I got his voicemail. We were just checking on you, Quip.
That's really weird. Now I'm starting to get a little worried. Maybe we should call the director and see if he's heard anything.
You're probably right. Maybe Quiver checked in with him. Sir, I'm sorry to bother you, but we haven't seen Quiver all day, and he didn't come to the fellowship meal last night. Yes, sir, I invited him. No, sir, I would have known if he was there. He has 4 kids who eat like 12 kids. Yes, sir. See you in a minute.
What did he say?
He was just about to come down here and get an update on any possible attacks that might be coming in. So he's coming down right now, but he hasn't heard anything from Quiver either.
That's so strange.
Quiver, there you are. Where have you been? We were getting worried.
Everything is fine. It's just been a very long night. Our dog finally had her puppies last night, and I've been up all night taking care of them. By the way, do either of you want a puppy?
Oh, it's nice of you to offer, but I can barely take care of myself, Quiver.
Yeah, I'm afraid I wouldn't be a very good doggy daddy either. But thanks for offering. How many puppies did she have?
She had 5. I don't know what we're going to do with all of them.
Well, it looks like someone has found Quiver since we last spoke. Is everything all right, Quiver? We were getting worried.
Yes, sir. I was just telling Quirk and Quip, our dog had puppies last night, and I've been up all night with them. I'm so sorry that I was late.
Sir, it looks like we have another group of incoming attackers showing up on the gap radar.
I thought we might see another attack today. Quiver, it looks like you're here just in time, especially if this is who I think it is.
It looks like their basic information is coming in now, sir. They are known as Abnormal and the mutant animals, sir.
I thought they might show up this week.
So you've heard of them, sir?
Indeed, I have. Abnormal and the mutant animals often coordinate their attacks to follow Loon Squad, the Time Twisters, and the Planetary Pirates. Their movements are fairly predictable.
So, who are they, sir? And what kind of attack do we need to prepare for?
Those are very good questions. It is actually interesting that this group is showing up today, especially after the night that you've had, Quiver. Let me ask you a question. How many puppies did your dog have last night?
She had 5, sir, and they all need good homes, if you're interested, by the way.
We can talk about that later. But let me ask you another question, Quiver. Of those 5 puppies, how many of them were cats?
Wow, I thought I asked these questions.
Well, sir, I'm not sure why you would ask that, but okay. None of them were cats, sir. They were all dogs.
Okay, how many of them were fish or frogs or elephants?
Okay, I'm getting a little worried now.
None of them were any of those things, sir.
And why do you think that is, Quiver?
Are we in some kind of alternative universe where the doctor doesn't understand basic biology?
Well, sir, it's because she's a dog. And when dogs have puppies, they are always going to be dogs. Dogs don't have cats, fish, frogs, or even elephants. That would be impossible.
Yeah, and really weird.
You're right, Quiver. It would be impossible and weird. But the group of attackers that we face today doesn't think so. In fact, Abner Mall and the mutant animals are here to try and convince everyone that all of the animals in the world evolved over billions of years from a single-celled organism.
Wait a minute. Are you telling us that they think that all of the animals in the world are actually related?
In some ways, that's exactly what they think, Quip.
But doesn't that make sense? But that doesn't make sense. I mean, has anything like that ever actually happened, sir? Has anyone ever seen a dog have a cat, a fish, a frog, or an elephant?
The answer to those excellent questions, Quirk, is no. No one has ever seen any of those things happen. In fact, it would violate one of the oldest and most widely known laws of science if it did happen. And it would be a direct attack on the foundations of the universe as we know them.
So, what do we need to do? How do we get ready for them? They look pretty mean and scary from what I can tell so far.
First of all, don't be afraid. I know that these images might look frightening, but we will defend against this attack in the same way that we have defended against all the others. We will gather evidence and learn the truth, and we will get whatever help we need from the defenders. There is nothing to worry about.
Yes, sir. So, Quiver and I will continue to monitor their information as it comes in and send it to the teachers during class. And you'll recruit any additional defenders that we might need, right?
My thoughts exactly, Quirk. And in the meantime, our teachers have some fascinating and faith-building truths that they can teach our students so that they will feel ready to defend against these attacks on the foundation of the universe. Kids, are you ready to learn more about the fascinating world of animals tonight? So that we can defend the foundations of the universe against Abner Mall and the mutant animals? All right.
Okay, so we gotta go defend ourselves against abnormal mutant animals. All right, so yeah, boo. All right, so I need the preschool patrol to go with the junior high schoolers to the snack room. And the primary protectors go to class. Oh, the gang. Oh, so y'all are all going to the same room.
I'm still on. I was like, right.
How do you turn this on?
No, it's not.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Okay. We're missing some. Oh, here they come. Yeah. Yeah. It's just far enough away where I need to lean over. We got everybody? All right. Before we get started, I got to thinking about some things last night, and Zane had asked me to do this earlier in the week, and I declined on some of it because it's just way above my head, and he did a great job of providing a foundation that will hopefully make what I have to talk about today make a little more sense. But what is science? You know, the definition that we have is the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against evidence obtained. Do you remember in your science class being taught the scientific method? You remember that there's just certain a process. It's a structured approach used to investigate questions and problems in science. It involves making observations, forming hypotheses, making predictions, conducting experiments, and analyzing results to either support or refute the hypothesis. And this process allows scientists to refine their understanding. Does it ever end? No. From a scientific standpoint, science by definition wants you to constantly be asking questions and challenging even previous results. So you never stop. It's the willingness to, a good scientist is willing to always question the findings. Today we're going to see some examples, and Zane already brought up some scientists or evolutionists. We're going to see examples of honesty and dishonesty. We're going to see examples of a lack of understanding, an unwillingness to accept better alternatives than what the evolutionist comes up with. True science has no agenda, really, other than to know more. Is faith completely unlike that? No. It's not dissimilar. We base our faith upon evidence, continual study, examining the source of our faith, the Word of God. And as believers, we should also be willing to examine evidence for our beliefs, and be willing to even adjust our beliefs based on new evidence that proves to be better than what we knew before. I think that's why it's called the living Word of God. I don't think we ever stop learning. Can you think of an example in the New Testament of someone that was that way? Remember the noble-minded Bereans? Searched the Scriptures daily to see if what they were being told. They were being given some new stuff. They had some ideas of what the prophets were talking about, but they were given better evidence, and they were willing to examine it. It may have taken them a while, but they were willing to examine it. Is it possible for us to allow our own preconceived ideas or inaccurate applications of Scripture, failure to examine context, grammar, historical evidence, language styles, interfere with our ability to make changes in our beliefs? we're just as subject to that kind of thing as those evolutionists. So we have to be careful about that. The primary focus on these lessons has been to really refute or show the weaknesses and the fallacies of what the majority of evolutionists are teaching, and in some cases to undermine the biblical account, the idea of an intelligent designer that created us. We got to be careful we don't let them draw us onto their playing field, because this guy or these guys that put this material together are just off the charts intelligent. I don't need to be trying to get in the weeds with somebody that's bringing all this evidence. I'll tell you what I did the other night. I went on to Grok, and I started taking quotes from these people and arguing with Grok. And Grok, as artificial as he is, came up with some arguments that would make me feel stupid. But I don't have the knowledge to go and refute that. So we need to be careful that our faith is not based on scientific evidence. And Zane just brought up the video. The guy brought up some other possibilities. You notice how he said, perhaps it was this, perhaps it was that. He's willing to say, because none of us were there, he's willing to say, here's what perhaps happened. You decide which one makes more sense. And in some ways it's a theory, not the theory of creation, but the theory of how it all happened. And that way, if we'll use that kind of process and just ask questions, we're going to see one question that we need to ask all the time. Finally, we need to be careful that we don't misapply passages to try to prove creation to the scientists or to the evolutionists. When we do that, and they discover it, Katie, bar the door, because that's all they're going to focus on whenever we misuse a passage to try to prove God's creation. There are numerous passages that work. I'm going to give you an example, and it's due to poor translations, and I think it might have even been using this material, but over in Hebrews 1, the ESV, or the LSB, even the ESV, said, God, having spoken long ago to the fathers and the prophets, many portions in many ways, in these last days spoke to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also made the worlds, who is a radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature. That word worlds, any time that the Bible is talking about the physical material creation, it uses the word cosmos. This word is not cosmos, it's aeon. We use the word eon to describe it. It's really a time frame, and the scriptures usually translate it ages. And then over in Hebrews 11, in verse 3, by faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen may not be made out of things which are visible. That word is also aeon. The literal translations use the word ages. And when you take the context of Hebrews, he's not trying to defend creation here. He is talking about the establishment of the creation of the covenantal ages or systems to serve God's purpose, particularly the translation from the Old Covenant to the New Covenant throughout the whole book of Hebrews. We got all the passages we need to prove what we want to prove. We shouldn't go to a passage that isn't even talking about material creation, because the translators, probably from Reformed theology, chose those words. I won't get into how worlds could mean ages, but it's not the material creation. So anyway, just wanted to, for me, it's difficult if I misuse a passage That's all anybody focuses on. They don't focus on the preponderance of evidence. So let's go into lesson 4. We're going to go into the animal kingdom. And some of the problems with the evolutionary theory, they don't stop with the origin that we talked about earlier. We've got a biological evolution, or what we referred to earlier in the series, macroevolution. That's a problem. It's the same problem that they have with the cosmic, where did it begin? There's different problems with that theory, and one of them is the problem that life came from non-life. Before something can evolve, something has to exist, right? There has to be a starting place. And the problem with the theory of evolution, as far as biological evolution, is that there's a lot of non-provable assumptions that go along with it. And so the unbiased or the honest scientist has got to ask, where did it come from? Does it actually point to biological evolution? The first assumption that non-living things have to give rise to living material. Spontaneous generation is what they call it. What we'll find in some of our textbooks, though, we're going to talk about Louis Pasteur more than the other two, but they kind of went along the same thing. They disproved this a long time ago. Anybody know anything else about Louis Pasteur?
Proves that it wasn't the maggots just spontaneously coming from meat, that they were two separate.
Right. Well, and he had a lot of different experiments. There's one where he separated something, and he couldn't produce life from non-organic material. And so even the scientists prove, even the textbooks, you don't see a lot of emphasis on it, but even the textbooks say that he basically disproved that life can come from non-life. It's called the first law, or the law of biogenesis. They even made it a law scientifically. So the other thing, Louis Pasteur, by the way, you have pasteurized milk. Remember, he did that. He was responsible for developing vaccines. So he was a very, very good scientist, and but he was also had to be honest about his results. Then we have a term called abiogenesis. We believe in biogenesis, that life comes from life. There is no serious, George Gaylord Simpson is one of the scientists. There's no serious doubt that biogenesis is the rule, that life comes only from other life, that a cell, the unit of life, is always and exclusively the product or offspring of another cell of some sort. That's the law, a scientific law. So why is there even any more discussion, you might ask? Well, there's an agenda. I freely admit that I would say predominantly among the scientific community, there's an agenda that wants to discard intelligent design, a creator, because then they've got something to answer to. So I'm going to skip through here so that we evolution, we can't even begin. Some of the same thing we've just talked about. Evolutionists don't know how life could emerge from non-life within their theory, but they believe it anyway. Notice what he said. The origin of life is subject of immense complexity, and I have to tell you that right up front, we don't know how life began. how can I tell you the origin of life when we're so woefully ignorant of that history? And then Paul Davies, another well-known evolutionist, one of the great outstanding scientific mysteries is the origin of life. How did it happen? The truth is, nobody has a clue. Well, does nobody really have a clue? We do have a clue. We know, but speaking as a scientist, they don't. This was a good one, I thought. This guy wrote an article that says, "Don't tell the creation if the scientists don't have a clue how life began." I mean, you got to respect their honesty. You got to respect that. We're going to see later some quotes from guys that, yeah, it doesn't make sense, but I believe it. It's a blind faith. So problem number 2 is the nature of first life. We talked about, we do know. The nature of first life was the next problem. There was an astronomer, Sir Fred Hoyle, once highlighted the gravity of the abiogenesis problem. So, again, abiogenesis means life came from nothing. So, he used an example. Basically, what he was saying in this quote, it's a pretty long quote, was that the chances, if you took a blind person moving the Rubik's Cube around and he found the solution, what are the chances of that? Now imagine 10 to the 50th power blind persons doing it all at the same time, coming up with the same solution the same way. That would get you, that he talked about biopolymers, which are large molecules produced by a living organism. That would get you just one of the many biopolymers that are needed to produce life. And then you still don't have the programming for it to make it all work together. Now, I don't know what number 10 to 50th power is, but I have a feeling my calculator wouldn't hold it. So, again, I don't need to disprove their theory. I just have to take their theory and say, well, this is what you're saying. This is where you end up. So you prove to me, the burden of proof is on you to prove to me how realistic that possibility is. So, Richard Dawkins, Zane had mentioned earlier, he's the well-known atheist evolutionist, and he had a conversation with Ben Stein. I think we did the deal on Ben Stein here several years ago, that we did a video that argued intelligent design. In fact, he did an entire CD. Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it? I was impressed by it. In Dawkins, Ben Stein was talking to him about the origin of life, and Dawkins says, nobody knows how it got started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life. It was the origin of life of the first self-replicating molecule. So, this is Ben's question. That's generally all we have to ask. When we get this information, we get somebody trying to push this on us, say, well, where did that come from? Okay, well, where did that come from? If we keep asking that, it keeps them on where they belong, and that is to prove their theory. And it's really not even a theory, it's more of a hypothesis. But they have to provide the evidence of it instead of it, presenting it as fact. And then Dawkins replied, I've told you, we don't know. So, this is supposed to be one of the leaders of the movement. And he says, we don't know. And then Ben Stein asks, so you have no idea how it started? And then Dawkins says, no, nor has anybody. So that's their answer. Nobody knows. Once they're pressing that corner, well, nobody knows. Well, how about this theory, like Zane had talked about earlier, with the evidence, not just a blind faith, but combined with evidence. The quote, one of the quotes by another, I'll read part of it here. He talked about, even conceptually, it's difficult to see how systems satisfying the minimum criteria for a living thing can arise by chance and simultaneously include the mechanism containing all the suitable information for its own replication. It just doesn't make sense. Then we've got to talk about the genetic code. And it just blows my mind. I've read, when I read about genetics and genes, and I'm thinking, that just strengthens my faith in an intelligent design. I mean, how they can just come up with a theory like that explains it any other way. Now, that's the problem number 3, is the origin of the genetic information. This one, I like what he says. Natural selection may explain the survival of the fittest, but it cannot explain the arrival of the fittest. We see the extinction of animals. We'll look at a couple examples of the moths. You remember the black moths versus the light-colored moths, and why did it all become black moths? Well, little birds coming around and eating all the white ones because they can see them, So that's why the genetic pool got changed. The natural selection process is really just a filtering mechanism to filter out certain genetic. Well, I don't know that you ever filter it out. It's always there because God. We're going to see later that a good explanation is that when God created all the animals, He created the genetic code that went with them too. And how often do we see things that, I'll use us as an example, neither Kim nor I were predisposed to type 1 diabetes. But Ben has the gene for type 1 diabetes. It was in the code somewhere. It might have been way down there where you couldn't see it, but it was there. Same way with animals, same way that have certain characteristics or colors. That is a logical explanation of how we got all these different varieties within the same kind. I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself there. So the evolutionist comes up with neo-Darwinism, which is, so they got to come up with something. So, we got natural selection, and then, are we already?
They get 2 or we get 1.
Oh, okay.
They move every 15 minutes.
Okay.
You get 3 of theirs.
Okay, good. It scared me. I thought we hadn't even started.
20 minutes.
Okay. The neo-Darwinism combines the survival of the fittest with genetic code mix-ups. Well, where'd those genes come from? There had to be something that had the genetic code to begin with. Genetic mutations coupled with natural selection will create the best fit species. That's what neo-Darwinism is. They use an example of, we talk about genetic mutations, things that pop up, that maybe we didn't see before. Well, like I said, God could have put the genetic code in there and it just started showing up whenever it was time. But still doesn't answer the question, where'd that come from? The genetic code had to be there. It had to exist before it could even mutate. You can't have a mutation if it's not there. And then the next part of that question is, how did it spontaneously generate itself? Good question for them to answer. And Gould, we'll refer to him, evolution has no way of even getting life from no life, and no way life, and no way to evolve it into something totally different. Didn't have the code there. Stephen Gould said a mutation doesn't produce a major new raw material. Raw material is always there. So you can't blame a mutation for that. I did get way ahead, didn't I? Yep. Okay. The next problem, I need to back up. But they don't have some of the, oh, I'm sorry. I'm thinking ahead of where I'm supposed to be. And, so we'll go to problem number 4, is insufficient evidence for evolution. So when we look at biblical creation, is it rational? Sure it is. It's rational. It's based on evidence that the Bible is of divine origin. Is evolution, is belief in evolution a rational belief or blind faith? Well, we're going to see, even from the evolutionists, what kind of faith it is, if you can call it a faith at all. When we took biology in our, even as far back as when I had biology, we'll find sections in our textbook that talk about the origin of man, the evidences for evolution, and there are 3 things that we can say about those evidences. They're either erroneous evidences, irrelevant evidences, or inadequate evidences. And we're going to see this in our next lesson when we start even talking about the human development. And I'm not going to go through all of these for the sake of time, but we're going to look at erroneous evidences first. Can y'all remember seeing a chart like that in high school? Some of you that are younger may not, but I can remember seeing that chart. I may not have learned anything else, but I saw that chart, and this was the result of Ernest Haeckel living at the turn of the 19th century, that early. And what he was basically saying is that all of the species have similar developments, regardless of what it is. They look the same. So the argument is, well, they all came from the same place. If they all look the same, for something in the 1800s, that's a pretty good chart, wouldn't you say? Looks good. He finally acknowledged that several of the charts he used to promote his theory were fabricated to support his theory. But we will still see that in books today. I mean, you would think, even to just save their own credibility, they would remove the stuff, and they have in some cases, but they would remove everything that was proved to be a fraud. But how about this one? I'll remember this one because my mother raised horses, and I just remember seeing this chart. the textbooks would have those charts, and I'm not, the fox-like creature known as Eohippus or Hyracotherium, whatever that is. But the leading paleontologists out there said that there's no evidence whatsoever to prove that chart, none whatsoever. So that was another fraud. And then we have the whale evolution charts, and they keep changing what the whale came from over the last several years. It's constantly changing their theories. And then we have the transitional fossils. Zane had mentioned earlier, the problem they have is there's no evidence of these transitions. Well, they found out later that this one right here, they thought that was their missing link. And they thought that these little wings were evolving into legs. However, in 2010, researchers in Poland discovered 4-limbed animal tracks in fossil strata believed to be 9 million years older than the Tiktaalik strata. So what are they going to do with that? Doesn't fit. So, but you'll still see this. You'll still see this in the textbooks. We'll move on to it's another example. We'll move on to category number 2, irrelevant evidences. And this is where, and I meant to say this at the beginning, is everything that an evolutionist says wrong? No. We don't need to be in defense mode and attack mode trying to attack everything they say, because there are some things that they say that we would agree on. And I think Zane touched on a couple of those earlier. But this category contains instances of evolution which are not disputed by creationists. So macroevolution says nothing to something. Microevolution says life produces life after its kind. And so we agree that life produces life. I'm getting ahead of myself again. The evolution which are not disputed by creationists, but which do not provide evidence. Yeah, microevolution doesn't provide evidence for macroevolution. Natural selection, for example. When a species isn't as well suited to a particular habitat as another species, if the less fit species doesn't migrate to a different environment that is more suited for the more fit species, will tend to thrive, and the less fit species will tend to die out. That's just common sense. That's just what's going to happen. Or when a species, certain genetic traits of a species, you may have something in the same species that have different characteristics, and one is better suited for this environment, and one is better suited for that environment. Well, this one isn't going to end up over here because that environment's not friendly to it, but it's still the same species. So you have to, and this is where the study on the finches comes in. Right.
Someone that's better adapted to that job, then they're going to go to jobs that they're better adapted to, or not work.
Yeah, or athletics. Put somebody in a position that they're not. You put a little tiny guy on the front line, he's going to get slaughtered, but he may be a great tight end or a safety or something. So, But in the context of what we're talking about, the finches, Darwin determined that the varieties of finch, as well as tortoises, iguanas, and plants, for example, with different colored feathers and different size shaped beaks. They were all still the same species, they just had different character traits, and so he was trying to figure out why. The possible variation seen among the finches was all inherited from the original ancestor that had those genetic traits in its genes. It's Levi's. Yeah. But macroevolution requires there to be totally new genetic material, for all of that, and it doesn't exist. We talked about the light moths versus the dark moths, the original kinds that, and so the original kinds that God created had the potential for a certain amount of diversity within them. Talking about the genetic makeup again. But not enough change, not enough to change the kinds into a different kind. Does that make sense? They can change certain characteristics, but you can't go from a horse to a person, a human. No way to find it. Mutated flies are still flies. Have we seen animals like that? I keep hoping for that big buck on my land, but there is some buck in there that's creating these antlers that go this way and 2 this way and 6 that way, and there's a genetic nuisance in that pool for what I want to accomplish. But that's why all of them don't have the same number of horns or the same way, look the same way. Well, sure, yeah.
They're not the same colors as the mom and the dad.
Yeah,
And so we've seen how many different variations now? It's
Probably at
nuts.
least 6 different colors.
and it's the same mom and dad, right?
Mom and dad.
You assume. There might have been a traveling salesman out there that came.
But, so we've seen it just in our own
Yeah.
little circle.
Oh, yeah.
You have this color that comes and you're like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
What would it look like that?
Yeah, especially when it's a Heinz 57 and they've got all kinds of genetic things going on. So yeah, that's a good example as well. But you don't see you haven't seen a chicken come out in the dog or something. So, all right. The next category is inadequate evidences are a problem. This type of evidence stands as what they call unrefuted potential evidence for evolution. The evidence isn't adequate evidence, but they'll use words also like potentially. But it's funny that you'll see the original person that wrote it says potentially could be whatever, and then somehow it gets morphed into was and is, and that's just intellectual dishonesty. Not necessarily with this person, but as it gets used in textbooks and presented in classes. Evolutionists argue that similarities in different life are every bit as much evidence for our relation to them as is our similarities to our human ancestors. So they're taking these similarities that we have with, say, a monkey or an ape, or even if you look at the human body, you can even look at birds and see something similar. And so that's their argument for evolution, but it's not adequate, is it? I mean, we don't have enough there. Darwin himself observed similarities are often seen in species that clearly share no common ancestor. 5 minutes, okay. So even Darwin admitted just because there's similarities in bone structure or the way things work, the way our elbows work versus, with fish. You may see some similarities between different types of fish. What does that better argue? A common maker. I mean, let's look. What about Ford Motor Company? Are there similarities between the F-100 and the Ford Taurus? Sure. Did one just appear and the other? They had a common designer. And that designer knew, based on, well, with God, it's unexplainable how, he's far beyond, man's thinking. But with the example of the car, those designers understood that certain things worked great, like a wheel, rather than being square, it's round. And maybe the axle, the way the independent front axle now works, or the ignition, some things that are different. But there are some definite differences between the two because they have a different purpose. So that it argues an actual common designer. And so one could argue that, we'll get to that in a minute. One could argue that because of the similarities, it has a designer. And if God is an efficient engineer, as they say here, why wouldn't he do the same thing with, different animals or different creatures? All right. Problem with macroevolution, again, is there's no means of creating the observed similar features between the creatures. And then the fossil record is, we don't see those transitions anywhere in the record. So, it would play, just like with the moths, it would play a part in how certain animals, maybe the gene pool, produced characteristics that suited a certain environment better, and that the ones that had that particular characteristic survived. And so the ones that didn't have that characteristic or that predominant characteristic, they would die off. But that's genetics, not evolution. That's just the the gene pool. And you can see that even in certain deer species. Some of them are bigger and stronger and compared to what we have in an environment where there's not the kind of food that they get to eat. So you can see some environmental things that would cause them to change. And you can see migration. We have to admit that there are certain things that change in our world where our weather patterns and things are getting hotter or colder in certain areas. I think that's part of God's creation. We got different cycles that create different climates. And you'll see migration of animals in certain places over a long period of time. And so that can have an effect on the species staying in one place or surviving. So in conclusion, at some point, in order for biological evolution to occur, life had to come from non-life. So I think we can check that off. They haven't been able to prove it. It had to have an operating program that told it how to function. So just having all the raw material and all the parts and pieces is great, but you got to have an operating program. Can you imagine if Arthur asked Zane for a computer and Zane just brought him all the wiring and all that and said, well, here's your computer, but there was no operating system? How functional would that be? Same thing. God provided the operating system for us. It had to be able to replicate itself. and have the right genome to be able to do that. In order for it to work, it had to spontaneously keep spontaneously changing over millions and millions and millions of years. And there's no evidence of it. And then finally, we're running out of time. I like this quote. This was Colin Patterson, senior paleontologist at the British Museum of Natural History in London, said about evolution. He said, "One morning I woke up and something had happened in the night, and it struck me that I'd been working on this stuff for 20 years and there was not one thing I knew about it." That's quite a shock to learn that one can be misled so long. Either there was something wrong with me or there was something wrong with the evolutionary theory. So there you have a scientist that's being intellectually honest. And that's the other thing. I have a great deal of respect for the guys, the people that put this material together, and I wish I had just a little bit of their knowledge, but they've done the research, and I will say that usually when there's a debate over a subject, the debate tactics are always going to be find their weakest argument and attack those. And it's the same way here. There are some interesting things that are brought up by evolutionists. I was reading some other things that it doesn't challenge my faith or what I believe today, but if we want to learn, we need to do that, examine all the evidence and weigh it against, first of all, what the scriptures teach, principally, but just keep, if we're that interested, just keep doing that scientific method and keep asking that question, where did that come from? Where did that come from? All right, that's the end of this class, and then we're going to get into human evolution here in just a little bit. Do they need this up here? Yeah. Angel needs it. Okay.
Yeah, there's a post.
Okay, they said for y'all to
Oh, they did, okay, you ready?
Oh, nope.
All right, it's time for the puppet show. Let's listen.
Yeah, all of us in this situation. Well, even without any sleep last night, this was certainly exciting enough to keep me awake today. And it sure makes me glad that I've only got 5 puppies to deal with instead of some of those weird-looking creatures.
I know what you mean. Can you imagine anything more ridiculous than some of those mutant animals? I mean, an animal that is part horse, part tiger, part bear, and part ram? It doesn't make any sense.
I agree, and that scratch with the lobster claw hands and the ostrich legs, I'm going to struggle to keep that one out of my nightmares.
I want to congratulate all of you and all of our students for your work tonight defending against Abner Mall and the mutant animals. Although this group of attackers certainly looked like something to be afraid of, I'm convinced that the truth was presented and that our crack squad of defenders and students were able to fend off all of the lies successfully.
In the end, sir, it just doesn't make any sense. This idea that all of the animals of the world just came from nothing and then slowly evolved from one single-celled organism, well, it just doesn't add up.
Exactly. And like we learned in the last attack, there's just no evidence to support this idea. I mean, it's one thing to say that there are small changes that happen within a kind of animal, like dogs, but to say that dogs could never come from other animals or that other animals could come from them, it's just not logical.
You're both absolutely right. It is an absurd idea, and there's no evidence, scientific or otherwise, to support it. In fact, all of the evidence that we do have supports God, the Bible, and the creation account in Genesis.
I also thought it was especially helpful to learn about the amazing designs within the animal kingdom. When things are that well designed, only a foolish person would think that it could happen by accident.
That's also true, Quirk, and we need to remember these amazing examples from God's creation so that when the foundations of the universe are attacked in this way, we will know how to make a good defense against them. I have a feeling that we might be facing our toughest attack yet, and we're going to need all of the help we can get.
I just have one question that didn't get answered today, sir. Do you want a puppy?